Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, and as we gear up for Hari Raya tomorrow, tonight on the show, we're going to be speaking to people in literature to find out what this celebration, what this festive period means to them, particularly in this past year or so that we've been celebrating festivities during lockdowns. Now, joining us first up on the show, we have Adriana Manan. She is a writer, a playwright, and a translator. Adriana, in her own words, describes herself as being passionate about storytelling and the expanse of stories as bridges across cultures, imaginations, and human desires. Welcome to the show, Adriana. What a lovely way to describe yourself. And if I may, Selamat Hari Raya to you.
Selamat Hari Raya, Melisa. And hey, thank you so much for having me here. It's the closest we can get to open house, so I'm really thrilled.
I you too, Adriana. I don't
Yes.
see me, but here I am.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Sharaad.
Yes, definitely the new kind of celebration. I mean, this is what we're going to have to get used to. Very much, kind of Zoom call rayas, video call rayas. So tell me a little bit about what Raya at home means to you, because this is our second Raya in a pandemic. What does that mean for you, particularly, during this time when everyone is encouraged to stay home, not travel unnecessarily, and many of us are separated from our families? So how's this year going to look? How's Raya this year going to look like for you, Adriana?
Mel, as a KL girl through and through, I used to think I was spared, the barriers to traveling and balik kampung, because even last year I remember it was more relaxed, right? The restrictions. So I could go to my grandparents' house, which is 15 minutes away. But this year, just the fact that it's not happening, for me, it really hits me as, oh, so close yet so far. And it reminds me of my years when I was studying overseas, where you just could not be with family. That was the only time I haven't been able to be with family for Raya. So that's my reflection point, I think, this year. Yeah.
Adriana, in fact, it's interesting that you brought up the question of being away and studying. So many Malaysians live abroad, and the diaspora, I mean, to the extent that they're Muslims, are going to have to deal with the separation during festivities. Does it make you focus on what is most important to you beyond the frills, as it were, of Hari Raya?
This year, no, definitely it does. And I think there's more of, if I may put it this way, more of a focus on the small moments and the more introspective moments that happen during Hari Raya, of which there are a lot. And I think I'm extra reflective because we've had many months, right, to reflect on life and where we are. So for me, that's what it feels like this year. Despair for many reasons, but also not wanting to let Raya lose its sheen, its little sparkle, even if that means, foregoing the frills.
Right. Can I ask you what it does mean for you? I mean, I love that there's this, it brings out a period of reflectiveness in us, thinking about the blessings that we have in our lives. But I wanted to ask you what it means, because Hari Raya is not just a religious, spiritual celebration, right? It's also one that's cultural. And what does that mean to you, and you personally, and in your little family circle? What does Raya represent to you? Is it about, getting dressed up in the morning and bersalam and minta maaf or exchanging duit Raya? What is that? What is Raya like for you?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think, and this is a moment of inspiration. And I thank you guys really, because this opportunity is what gave me that space I was thinking about roots. In my moment of inspiration, and there's a departure point here, because I often find that for Hari Raya I'm often hunting down roots and leaves, literally. So like the galangal root and the turmeric root, and the turmeric leaf and the kaffir lime, limau purut leaf from rendang. Basically, I'm often finding myself like driving around, like that's an image of Raya. So then in my moment of being poetic, I thought, hey, and their roots really comes back to fitrah, which is like the root of Aidilfitri. We pay the zakat fitrah. And I think for my family, it's always been very festive And festive, the way I look at Raya, it's like, to me, it's the celebration with the most epic build-up, if I may, from my observation. You know, one whole month. So Raya, it means so many things. Crossing time, actually, and actually your life cycle, how your roles change, like from being somebody who doesn't fast and, you know, looks forward to Bunga Api and Duit Raya when you're a child. Now I shoulder different responsibilities. I'm the one who cooks for my family mostly, for example, for Raya Day, and I give Duit Raya now. So I think there's just this whole idea of that constant memory of your roots and where you are also progressing, in a sense, how you're flourishing, if you want to look at that way, through the course of your life.
And you know, yeah, there are different traditions, and I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
about the way in which, say, Christmas,
Yeah.
you know, in some literary traditions, has become the context for an exploration of some of the deeper contradictions in those societies between the outward expression of joy and the festiveness, as it were, the, you know, the lights at malls and so on and so forth, and then the inner loneliness that sometimes you know, grips people because you're expected to be happy, or you know, there are people who are lonely in the world, and Christmas, for instance, does not relieve that. Do you see that tension between what you ought to feel and what some people might actually be going through?
Definitely, but I also think, would I say it's entered the public imagination or the public imagery? I mean, it's hard to say, but what I do sense is that I think, because again, going back to that whole idea of, you had Ramadan, right? So you had the 30 days, and then it's Raya. Maybe the contrast that could be gripping is the fact that we're asked to give sedekah, to donate, help out the less fortunate, the ones among us who are maybe, you know, not in as cheery a phase of their lives as we are. But then on Hari Raya, do we remember them? And then I think also, maybe if I could maybe offer an idea of contradiction, is actually restraint versus excess. And I know in a world where, you know, you can, well, pre-pandemic, you can pay and eat out a lot for buka puasa, for example. Maybe Ramadan and the idea of restraint maybe is a bit wobbly in this day and age. But I think, yeah, that juxtaposition, that contrast it is something to be felt, where you're like, well, we're happy, we're saying everybody enjoys being in the family gathering, everybody enjoys bersalaman, but maybe some people don't, you know, and it's hard to express that because human relationships can be very naughty, right? And then also the idea of, you know, how do we celebrate, how do we be self-aware, how do we think about community as well? It can't just be 30 days in the year. So if I wanted to take the slightly, I guess, pensive, maybe not the cheery Bunga Api Raya, that's what
Yeah,
I would
no,
say.
Adriana, I love that. That really resonated with me, and I have to say that, you know, this Raya in particular, because we spent the last Raya also during a pandemic, and this fasting month in particular has been one that was personally reflective. I took a lot of time, and I love that you said it's about restraint, right? It's about restraint versus access. I do feel that, and I wonder whether a lot of people also feel that, because our worlds have become a lot smaller, our options have become a lot smaller, and you know, priorities kind of align during this time. I wanted to ask you, you know, I love the points that you brought up, and I'm wondering whether you're seeing that reflected in literature around us, in the popular culture around us. Do we see that represented? Sometimes Hari Raya festivities or celebrations are presented in a way that's almost superficial, with the songs and the celebrations, the bunga api and the dressing up. Do you see a deeper reflection of what Hari Raya means in Malaysian literature, for instance?
Wow. And this is where I wave my little proverbial white ketupat and say, I can't claim such expansive knowledge of Malaysian literature, but, you know, if we can talk about popular culture, you know, the thing that we always look forward to is the Raya advertisements, right? And I haven't seen all of them. I know there are a lot this year, but I think, you know, the idea of course, human relationships is the big one, and I think the reflectiveness is often about what's important. paring it down to what's important, which is always family. And also a thing. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a complaint. Like I'm not a little humbug, but as somebody who doesn't have that, Balik Kampung annual ritual, when I looked at ads, I used to think that, oh, this doesn't really speak to me. This is not my experience. But as this year, especially, has because our worlds have become smaller, I've learned to be more empathetic. So I think I know in Raya ads, there are a few that I've seen of about contradicting, but the idea, there's one in particular, it was about a daughter being very upset at her father, who was having his business was affected, and he wasn't doing very well financially, but he kept giving to his neighbors, giving produce in this sense from his business. And I see that there's a bit more, to me, there's a bit more of exploration of that idea of how in a time of hardship, how do we become inclusive in our own little spaces? And I think honestly that captures what I've observed in general in these times. Yeah.
Well, okay, we have just a little bit of time left. I mean, I know people don't necessarily watch a lot of television. I'm sure they're focused on the families, or like you, maybe cooking. But when you have your quiet time, Adriana, what do you do during Raya? What is it? I mean, you pick up a book to escape all the festivities and find a private space for yourself. What do you do?
Or do you, like me, go to the kitchen table and do another round of the ketupat and and kuah kacang and rendang?
Oh, definitely. No, I don't do the book. I think instead of a book, I do the mid-morning nap or the early afternoon nap, which seems to be a Raya Day one staple for many people. For me, it's catching up, really, catching up with friends and family that I haven't met, especially if you have family friends who actually you see once a year at Raya. There's that. And also, I like to invite my friends and just hang out with them. And really, it's just an opportunity to catch up. That's my moment. That's my moment of sharing and really wanting to just extend a sense of joy, really, of Raya,
Are you going to do the video call Raya catch ups this year?
I don't know, because we did just meet a couple of weeks ago for my grandmother's birthday, so we're okay. My immediate family, but we said, and hopefully, who knows how the cookie will crumble. We're hoping to have a delayed Raya festivity, or I'll send them food. I've had requests for me to send over my cooking, and I'm like, okay, we'll see.
Adriana,
we would like to
taste
submit requests as well.
Okay, all right. I got to increase the number of the kilos of the beef I was going to buy tomorrow. Then.
Okay, all right, Adriana, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We appreciate your time. Selamat Hari Raya to you. Hope you have a great one.
Thank you, Hari Raya, Melisa and Sharaad. Take care, yeah.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, we're gonna take a quick break here on the show, but we will be back with more. So stay tuned to Consider This. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan, and thank you so much for spending the night before Hari Raya with us. We're delighted now to welcome on the show Heidi Shamsuddin. She's an award-winning author of stories inspired by Southeast Asia. They're written for both children and adults, and currently Heidi is compiling and adapting fairy tales, folklore, myths, and legends from all around the Nusantara region. It's wonderful to have her join us on the show. Heidi, hi, welcome to the show. It's good for you to join us Malam Raya. How's it going?
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for inviting me on the show. I'm really happy to be here on this special. Yeah.
So usually, if we weren't under lockdown, if we weren't in a pandemic, I would be spending my Malam Raya in my kampung in Penang, and we would be either cooking or preparing to cook and gossiping and, ironing baju raya and telekung and all that. what would you be doing if it wasn't a lockdown? What has previous Rayas been for you? And how is it different from the Raya that we're spending this year and the last?
Right. My parents and my in-laws are actually where I am, like within the district, very convenient.
Oh.
So I'm still thankfully able to see them during Hari Raya. In past Hari Rayas, we would go to my mother-in-law's house typically and buka puasa there for the last time. And normally someone would get some contraband sparklers for the kids somewhere, somehow, you know. And we would play out after dinner and listen to the announcement for whether or not the next day is Hari Raya. My father-in-law would make his usual silly jokes about Hari Raya, and yeah, we would just have a really nice, chill, quiet family time. So we won't be able to do that again this year because we're concerned about going over too often. We'll visit them on Raya Day itself. But yeah, it's normally quite a quiet kind of evening for us.
You know, as the non-Malay, non-Muslim in the room, I must say that, you know, what I have always looked forward to is a couple of friends over the years who really, really do double time on Raya to produce a food that is not your normal fare. Right, so I think of a good friend, Rani Othman, who's a well-known sociologist, and going to her house and meeting her mother, every year as she cooks all this wonderful Johor food. And for me, that would be really the high point. Is that looking forward to things that you don't get in the shops and things nobody would have the time to make. And I wonder if that's also part of this experience. The culinary dimension, obviously, for a lot of us, is so memorable, but clearly for you it might be more than just the food, right?
Yes, in fact, for the past few years now, it's been a tradition in my husband's family to kacau rendang outside. So my father-in-law would actually go around the house looking for old pieces of furniture.
What to burn?
Yeah, because he's the man and he has to make fire for the rendang. So he would actually do that, and he would chop up the wood and make a bonfire in the garden. This would be maybe the weekend before Raya. And then we'd take charcoal and we would make a huge batch of my mother-in-law's special recipe rendang, beef rendang from Perak, which is like the most delicious thing in the world. So we've been doing that for a few years now, but obviously last year we couldn't do that. And they're getting on a bit. So my husband has actually taken her recipe and he has adapted it. It's not as good as my mom-in-law's, but it's fair. It's good. It's delicious. So we started doing that over at my house now. So we just had the kacau luar rendang tradition at our house. We did it yesterday, in fact, and that would be the rendang for the family.
Is kacau the word? I mean, is it an old word for stirring? Is that what kacau means?
Kacau luar, like we do it outside because it's so messy. We're using coal, arang, and we're using like fire. And the fire and the coal gives that rendang a special smokiness that's quite different from the usual rendang. And
we taste it.
Yeah. People, our friends and family love come over to my mom-in-law's just for that rendang. And
Heidi, you're doing a great job selling it. I think you might have to send over some of that rendang for us to taste test it and be the judge of that. I wanted to ask you to bring in your work a little bit, because I love how observant you are about cultural practices, and you bring that into your own family life, but you're also looking around the region and looking at different fairy tales and folklore. And I'm wondering if you've observed anything similar that brings in the cultural practices that we see sometimes during Hari Raya be it food or the way we interact with family and the community. Is that reflected in your work, or is it reflected in the fairy tales that you're observing around the region? What have you seen?
Well, I think for our region, Southeast Asia, Asians in general, we are very family orientated. So obviously, getting together for a festival, be it Hari Raya or Chinese New Year or Deepavali, is quite an important thing. I mean, there is the family units in this part of the world is still very, very strong. And in terms of fairy tales, folk tales, most of the themes in these stories center around the family and getting together, and food also is a central part of these stories as well. So definitely, it's interesting because the fairy tales and folk tales that we see from long time ago, it's basically being reenacted every year whenever we celebrate a cultural celebration like Hari Raya or Chinese New Year. So yeah, definitely there is a link there.
I spy on your shelf the Hikayat Raja Babi, the Malay tale of the Pig King, and I wonder if you can pick it off the shelf, because what's really interesting about this book is that, as I understand it, was written by a merchant in the 18th century while he's waiting, right? It's this kind of a lull time, and he writes this over the top story of an adventure, and it's like the pandemic as well. We're kind of caught in the between, and here we have a man from 200 years ago who used that in betweenness to create this wonderful story. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, you're spot on. Well, this story, this is based on a hikayat, an epic called Hikayat Raja Babi, and that is a sprawling work of 46,000 words, and this is only 1,250 words or so. So this is a summarized version of that. But basically, this merchant, Yusuf Abdul Kadir, he was in between jobs. He was waiting for his business to pick up, and he got bored and decided to write a story, a fantastical story. And what better way to write a story than to write about a prince who was cursed to be born in the body of a pig? At the time, I think pigs still have that kind of social stigma and religious stigma they have today. So it was quite controversial, really, So, but it probably led to a lot of interest in people looking for the book and reading the book. And yeah, the fact that he just sat down and he wrote this long story because he was bored, it does reflect somewhat the situation that we're in now. I think a lot of writers, authors, artists, in fact, have been quite productive during this time because there's less distraction. You're at home, you can't do anything, so you might as well work. In fact, I've been quite productive since the pandemic started.
Heidi, this is a 200-year-old story, right? I mean, this is a story that's been in our history, in our culture for a very long time, but it's one that I feel has been lost in the voices of more contemporary fairy tales and folklore. And I'm wondering why you think that is. Why are some stories not told and passed down through generation as much as other stories are, not integrated into mainstream culture, popular culture? I would love to see a film of this story. I would love for this to be stories that we tell our school children, and part of the bedtime stories that we tell our kids. Why do you think that this story has not been as told or often told as others in Malay culture, Malay literature?
There are various reasons for that. The main reason is that we are inundated with stories from other cultures. Our bookstores are not filled with our books, our Malaysian books. They're filled with bestsellers from the US and the UK. So those are the books that are readily available. When we talk about fairy tales, you go to a bookstore, you don't see a book of Malaysian fairy tales. You don't see them quite, it's not accessible, it's not
Right.
always there.
Everybody knows the story of Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and Snow White, but do they know, the story of Putri Gunung Ledang, for example, all this other Malay folklore? So do you think there needs to be more that needs to be done to bring that into, Malaysian households?
Definitely, definitely. And I have made it my personal mission actually to get these stories out there. In fact, earlier this year, I launched my YouTube channel. I'm on YouTube, called Nusantara Fairy Tales with Heidi. And the sole purpose of that channel is just to tell these stories, to get them out into the community. I want to restart this oral tradition. So by me telling the story to people, I'm hoping that they'll go away and tell these stories to their children, to their friends, and then, you can see the progression of the story sort of spreading, the way that story should spread. Now, Hikayat Raja Babi almost died because it wasn't being told. People didn't know about it. It wasn't in a book form. People just didn't know about it. But Cinderella, everyone knows about it because
Heidi, every folklore, every fairy tale has a moral at the end of the story. What is the moral of the story of Hikayat Raja Babi?
I think this is a classic coming of age story, a hero's journey, really. I mean, he was born right at the bottom in the body of a pig, basically, and he had to make his way up in the world. He had to find a way to break the curse. And along the way, he met friends and enemies. He overcome his difficulties, and he managed to transform himself so that in the end, he broke the curse and became a prince again. And that's the moral.
And that's the happy ending. Well, Heidi, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We really appreciate you sharing some time with us today.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
All right, that's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. But before we leave you, just a reminder that you can get all your COVID-19 vaccine information on astroawani.com and the Astro Awani app. And before we leave you tonight, Sharaad and I would like to wish Selamat Hari Raya to everyone who's celebrating. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off the evening.
We will be back with you same time tomorrow. Till then, good night.